Hello. I'm going to quickly run through this build idea that I had for a crit Fire Thorns Infernalist, which is a weird thing to say. To start with, your core items are Crown of the Pale King for Thorns damage is triggered by all hits, Briar Patch Boots for base Thorns critical hit chance. They start at 25%. And corruption can take up to 30%. Anywhere between 25 and 28% is probably perfectly fine. You might need a couple more like increased critical hit chance nodes in the tree to get you to 100%, but it's one or two extra nodes. It's not like a crazy requirement to get a certain percentage. Coward's Legacy. You count as on low life while it's 75% of max life or below. This, combined with Baydat's Will, caps you at 75%, so you're always on low life, which allows you to use Pain Attunement for 30% more critical damage bonus while on low life, which you're permanently on. For the rest of the gear, Defiance of Destiny for the amulet, you're getting hit a lot to trigger Thorns, so it just synergizes really well. You recover 10% of missing life before being hit by an enemy, so this recovery happens before the hit damage is applied. It also gives percentage max life, and both of these values can be scaled with life catalysts, and obviously corruption value rolls as well. This one was about a divine, I think, thereabouts. You might be able to get it cheaper or more expensive. I don't know. It's kind of the economy is a bit cooked right now. Then for the rest of the items, it is 2 rings for life, res, a little bit of int, a little bit of strength. Not super important. These are dirt tier rings that I had in my stash that just helped me cap res and get a little bit of attributes. So you could absolutely get much better rings for a much better experience than what I've got here. Because you're basically converting with Avatar of Fire, and because of that, your only values that you really care about, or the only mods you really care about, are damages extra fire and increased fire damage. Because you physically you can't deal any other damage basically. The +3 level to all spell skills doesn't matter. There's only 2 things that get scaled by this. One of them's your curse. The other one is Power Siphon itself, which does not matter in the slightest. So literally, you could get a wand with just fire, damage extra fire damage and increased fire damage, and that would really be all that you would care about. Shield is just armor, life, little bit of int, and res. It does have some flat thorns, not super important, because most of your damage realistically is going to come from scavenged plating, which I'll explain a little bit more in a second. Pragmatism. This is something that I'm trying. It might not be the most optimal, but the thought process is basically Pragmatism allows you to constantly use your charms whenever they can possibly be triggered. So this Pragmatism combined with the Dousing Charm is used when you become ignited and grants immunity to ignite. The role that I have also gives guard during effect, which is not huge. It's like a little bit of like hit mitigation, so it can help a little bit. So now the reason that I'm using Pragmatism with a Dousing Charm is Grinning Immolation. It gives 30% more critical damage bonus. However, whenever you deal a critical hit, you take 15% of your life and your energy shield as fire damage per second. You become ignited. So you need a way to mitigate the ignite, because it's quite a lot of damage, even with capped fire res. So using Pragmatism with this charm, it means that you will never become ignited, and it will also constantly be triggering the guard for a little bit of hit mitigation. And when patch 0.2.0 is released, there is a unique charm that ignites everything in a circle around you for, I believe it's 25% of your maximum life whenever you get ignited. So as another possible thing that could synergize well with this setup, if there's more to facilitate the build so it doesn't feel so bad in certain situations. So grinning immolation, Baydat's will for spirit and the life reservation to enable pain attunement. Altered flesh gives you a little bit of cold and lightning damage mitigation if you can get your fire res above 75. I'm not super sure on the calculations for how this would work if you just have 75 all res. I'm not too sure on that one. And then for the 20% physical damage taken as chaos damage, this is like maybe slightly higher mitigation, just. You don't get a lot of chaos res. Pragmatism itself is a minus 17% of chaos res, and I can only have like 10% from the amethyst ring base, 24% from the sapphire ring. So you could definitely get more chaos res than I have. I only have probably like 27%. It's basically nothing. But armor itself sucks quite bad anyway, so it might overall be some better mitigation, especially if you end up getting crushed or something like that. And then finally, Loyal Hellhound for the Summon Infernal Hound skill. 20% of hits of damage from hits is taken from your Hellhound's life before you. This also enables you to use some other things from support gems, which kind of support the build a bit better, which I'll go into once we get to that. So for the tree itself, this you can ignore. I've got this for 10 intelligence because my items are bad and I'm poor. You're basically going for critical exploit for crit damage. These recoup nodes you could probably ignore. Recoup is pretty bad. In Path of Exile 1, recoup happens over 4 seconds, but in Path of Exile 2 it happens over 8 seconds, and it is very noticeable in comparison. So I don't know if this is good. I was trying it out. It doesn't actively hurt the build, and I don't really have the gold, as you can see, to try any other methods right now. Your main sort of damage, or one of your main damage clusters here is, I'll take this out, a lot of crit damage bonus from these small nodes, some crit chance here, but your notables are 10 dex, 20 increased crit chance, 30% increased critical damage bonus, and 10, and then also 30% increased damage if you dealt a critical hit in the past 8 seconds, and 12% increased critical hit chance. You will always be critting because the Thorns, your Thorns has 100% crit chance, so your main damage is crits. And then again, the small nodes are just kind of crit chance, crit damage, and then also increased damage if you dealt a critical hit recently. I am using currently a 1 divine against the darkness for a little bit more max life from small nodes, and then a little bit of damage as extra fire. If you were to use a rare or a non-unique time lost jewel, a medium radius is exactly this, will hit the same amount of nodes as a large radius. In which case you could use increased effective small passive skills to get some more crit chance and more crit damage if you feel that that's better. Overall, it might be better than this, because honestly, the 4% of damage extra fire is not huge. But the 1% max life is pretty handy. It goes from 2,659 to 2,806. So it's a decent chunk. It's like an extra 150 flat life. Then over here, a little bit of LA pen, a little bit of crit, 20 crit chance, and 40% increased elemental damage if you dealt a critical hit recently. Again, you'll always be critting, so this will always be active. Pain attunement, spoke about earlier, is 30% more critical damage bonus when on low life, which are always on low life. These nodes here, Vulgar Methods and Barbaric Strength, these are all just critical hit chance and critical hit damage bonus. You don't really care too much about the increased mana cost of skills, and the reduced mana doesn't really matter. You're not using skills that much, so your mana cost, you'll never struggle for mana, basically. Thornhide, very strong. The small nodes give increased critical damage bonus. The big node, the notable, sorry, gives plus 5%. So even if you have the base 25% on Briar Patch with Thornhide, you've got 30% base crit, which is huge. Then breakage. A core component of the build is breaking armor to trigger scavenge plating to get Thorns damage for your base damage, basically. So this helps a lot. This sort of cluster of nodes here helps a lot. It gives you a little bit of increased armor, which helps, and then it also gives you increased armor break and 10% chance to defend with 200% of your armor. Down here, this is just one of the very few life nodes that you can get access to. A little bit of strength. Skill effect duration is important for scavenge plating. I'll explain that a little bit more once I get there. A little bit of block chance. Recover life on block. This is 5% strength and threshold. This is not important if you can get strength otherwise. I couldn't, so. Retaliation, Thorns damage. If you've blocked recently, you will always be blocking because your main skill that you'll be using is Resonating Shield, which means that you're constantly blocking. And the main component of this build is Avatar of Fire. 75% of damage converted to fire damage, deal no non-fire damage. So this does mean that on your wand, you can only get damage as extra fire and increased fire damage, because with Path of Exile 2, once something has been converted from its original element, it'll no longer be scaled with those elements. So in Path of Exile 1, if you had, say, if you converted 100% of your lightning damage to cold damage, you can double dip with lightning damage and cold damage modifiers. In Path of Exile 2, it doesn't work that way anymore. If you convert 100% of your lightning damage to cold, it'll only scale with cold. So that means that when you're running Avatar of Fire and you've converted all of your damage to fire, you'll only be able to scale it with these mods. Sorry. So that's kind of the tree. Then you will run into a lot of you've got a lot of dual sockets, and with these dual sockets, I literally just have fire damage, Thorns damage, fire pen, Thorns damage. These are really cheap. Getting Thorns damage and fire pen together is like 5 to 10 exalts, some even cheaper, if you can get people to reply from their like fucking 3-month-old listings. Thorns and fire pen are kind of like the main stats. You could also get max fire res, I believe, if you've got a bit more currency to put into jewels than I do. That's kind of the main thing. That's basically what all the jewels are, and then obviously the against the darkness for max life and damages extra fire. That's kind of the basis for the tree. That's everything. There's definitely more optimization that I could do. The character is only level 85, and this was kind of just, I spent millions of gold because of how much it costs to respec. I had originally gone through a setup using Mind Over Matter, which I think would probably be better overall if you had the currency to scale it. Because you have Bedat's Hand, which gives you maximum energy shield per X maximum life, and then also Bedat's Gaze, which gives maximum mana per maximum life. So you can use both of those in conjunction with Eldritch Battery to basically scale a lot of flat mana, and on top of going intelligence. But I think you would probably need to use, say, like an Astra Mentis, because the skills that you use do have a relatively high strength requirement, which I'll explain going through those skills here. So your main damage is Scavenge Plating. Scavenge Plating gives you a flat amount of Thorns per Scavenge Plating, up to a maximum of 10 stacks. The problem with Scavenge Plating is, 1, you need to fully break an enemy's armor to gain stacks, and 2, each stack of Scavenge Plating has its own individual duration. So you need to be able to basically expunge armor break to re-break their armor to keep your stacks up. Now, you will gain Thorns damage per level, but the armor, the 5% more armor per scavenge plating, level 19 is kind of the last realistic break point. You'll see if I take this out, it goes down to no, it doesn't. I'm a liar. Anyway, level 18 is the last breakpoint, not level 19. Sorry. But basically, when you break the armor of an enemy, normal enemies will give you 1 stack, magic enemies will give you 2 stacks, rare enemies will give you 5 stacks, and unique enemies will give you 10 stacks. So you want to be able to break their armor and then expunge it, and then break their armor again to keep your stacks up. So on scavenge plating, you have physical mastery, gives you more flat thorns. The higher you can push the level of scavenge plating, the more thorns you get per stack. Persistence, again, skill effect duration will affect your individual duration of your stacks. The current setup that I have here is just over 16.5 seconds, which gives you plenty of time to clear stacks and re-break armor. Clarity for mana regen, because why not? Vitality, life regen, you're constantly being hit, you want to keep your life up. Magma barrier, because Magma barrier has a surprisingly high base damage, even with my shield having next to no armor on it for it to scale. You can see that magma spray, 4 to 6 added fire damage per 15 armor and shield, but it also has a 393% percentage in skill. So basically this is just like a little, whenever you pull up your shield using Resonating Shield or Active Block if you use it, you'll, within that first half a second of having your shield up, you'll spray out a little magma spray, which will give you an endurance charge and deal a little bit of attack damage. It's not super noticeable, but it can be, it's a little bit of free damage basically. But the main thing really is just to enable more buffs being applied. So Cannibalism, Life on Kill, and Herbalism, Life Flask Recovery, basically. You don't care about mana, you don't use enough for it to even matter, but you do use enough through Resonating Shield. Blasphemy, for flammability, this is one of the only things that the +3 to all spell skills will even affect. Heightened Curse for curse effect, Ritualistic Curse, and Magnified Effect for more area of effect, so that if you're being hit by ranged enemies, they're also more likely to be affected by your curse at the same time. So for your main skills, what you're going to be using is Resonating Shield. Now, Resonating Shield is a channeling ability, or attack more specifically, where you'll wrap your shield with your weapon, creating an AoE around you that deals physical damage, which is now converted to fire with Avatar Fire, but it will break armor per hit. The base value at level 16 is 732, and then using Demolisher with the passive tree, it goes up to 2152, which is more than enough to armor break most normal enemies when you're clearing packs, and it'll break the armor of non-armored enemies within 2 to 3 hits. Then Unbreakable, because which gives you 200% more stun threshold when using support skills. When you're using Resonating Shield, you're constantly blocking, which means that every time you get hit whilst using Resonating Shield, your stagger bar will start to fill. So this basically just means that you can ignore that for a little bit longer. And then Inspiration for less mana cost. This combined with Clarity will completely negates Resonating Shield's mana cost. So again, the main point of Resonating Shield is you use this, you break armor, and then you use Seismic Cry to, with Exploit Weakness, to consume the armor break to allow Resonating Shield to armor break again. The reason why I'm using Seismic Cry is because it's an AoE that deals damage. It is a bigger AoE than Resonating Shield itself, and it doesn't go on cooldown unless it stuns an enemy, which you'll almost, in fact, I have never stunned an enemy with this and had it go on cooldown the whole time I've been testing this build. You could use probably really any skill that you really wanted to use. You could, instead of this, if you wanted to try something else that you prefer the use of, this is what I found easiest to use because it's relatively quick with a bit of quality on it. And it hits in an AoE similar to Resonating Shield. Now, for Resonating Shield, I also have Bullseye because you want to hit to break armor. Without this, you have about a 73% chance to hit with my current stats. And with Bullseye, it goes up to 88%. Not super important, but it helps. And then Shield Charge with Martial Tempo, Ingenuity, and Stomping Ground, which I think is bugged because it doesn't even show up anyway. So literally Martial Tempo and Ingenuity, it's just for movement. You only have between, 10 and 20% on the boots. You can hopefully get a better roll than I got. But even with 20%, you're still pretty slow. Then you have Infernal Hound, which you have Minion Mastery to give it more life. Last Gasp means that it stays quote-unquote alive for 4 seconds after it's technically dead. Meat Shield to give it more life. And then Fire Exposure, because Infernal Hound will ignite in an AoE around it, which means that so long as they get tagged by that ignite, they're then exposed for 8 seconds. So it's kind of like passive fire exposure. And with Last Gasp, there's only around about a 2 to 3 second period where your dog is actually dead. And then on the wand base that I'm using, I've got Power Siphon. It doesn't really matter that much. This just gives you cull. So when you cull an enemy, you've got Soul Drain for 12% of mana over 4 seconds when you cull, Life Drain for 12% of life over 4 seconds when you cull, Arcane Tempo because it's a spell so you cast it faster, and I've got Elemental Discharge just to try it. It cleanses when you cull an enemy, because that's when the skill hits, you consume Ignite from your dog or from any damage you deal. And do basically a fire AoE. It doesn't deal a lot of damage. It was just something to throw into it. That's basically it for the skills and more or less everything. I'll go into a map. This is not a super crazy map. I think it's a tier 12. Tier 12 with increased magic monsters, increased rare monsters, increased monster damage, poison on hit, and then increased ailment and stun threshold. So, again, Thorns itself is not particularly great. It relies on things hitting you, and some things just don't want to hit you. You basically, this is how it goes. Do this, stand still, stuff hits you. If it tries to hit your dog, stand on top of your dog. If things stay alive for longer, you Warcry, do it again, Warcry, basically that. And again, Power Siphon will allow you to cull things that maybe you've gotten low and just won't hit you. It's relatively tanky, so long as you're not being hit by slams. Slow slams is kind of your kryptonite, because they don't hit you fast enough to trigger Thorns fast enough to actually kill them, and they don't they deal a lot of hit damage, which can kind of reduce the effectiveness of Defiance of Destiny. Maybe one day I'll find a rare. But this is basically it. You get your Scavenge Plate stacks up, you walk into stuff, you hold down Resonating Shield to block whilst hitting, and move from pack to pack, cull anything that's in cull range. If you don't care about using cull, it's basically a 1-button build, 2-button build. You could put exploit weakness on magma barrier if you really wanted to. And then you would just, if you're good at, you know, timing your blocks and stuff like that. That's originally how I was doing it. Apparently there are no rares in this map. So, the stats on this is 100% crit chance and 575% crit damage bonus. This is a lot higher for shield skills, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's a bug, but where my Thorns has 575 crit multi, my shield skills have 1421. And I'm not too sure why. But if you wanted to try and make a resonating shield build work, that might be the idea. I don't know if it's a bug with pain attunement or grinning immolation. Weird. Okay, so you can see that like the damage on rares is pretty decent when they actually hit you. And so long as you're constantly clearing the armor break, it's up pretty consistently. Like you can see you're actually breaking 6,400 armor per hit with everything actually applied. So the armor break, when I first started trying to figure this build out, armor break was like the biggest struggle, because I just couldn't sort of come up with a setup that was good enough. But thankfully it scales with resonating shield scales with levels really well. So if you have enough strength and you can get your resonating shield to a higher level, mine is only level 16. If you can get your resonating shield to a higher level, which I probably could, it would also scale the flat armor break value, which would also be scaled by Demolisher and also by this breakage wheel here as well. So that's kind of the idea. It could definitely be a lot better, and I'm hoping that when this next patch comes out, there'll be sort of more items that will synergize well with this. This was put together on a pretty tight budget. None of the items are particularly expensive, especially not the core items that actually make the build run. But for it to be... I don't know how scalable it is, and I don't know how well it would perform in higher tier maps with this current setup. Again, this is what I believe is a tier 12 map, and it's only a tower map, so it, you know, your mileage may vary. I did clear a tier 14 earlier on and killed the boss, but if you run into a life regen mob, it's basically unkillable. And at that point, because of obviously how maps work, your map becomes uncompletable. So if map completion is important to you, then this build is not going to perform well if you get unlucky with mods. But if you're past the point of caring about that kind of stuff, and you're just like running through maps and want to play like a goofy build, this might be something worth messing about with. You might come up with better setup than me. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. The crit fire Thorns Infernalist. Thanks for checking it out and listening to my rambling.